All right, hello and welcome to this episode of the Worth Watching podcast. Today our guest is Jesse Meehl of the Haunted by Humans blog. He does all things movies over there, and you can check him out if you want to check that out. Again, it's Haunted by Humans at WordPress. And he's also just a big comic book and movie fan in general, so we're going to talk a little bit about comic books, movies, and what happens when the one is adaptated into the other. How are you doing tonight, Jesse?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I am pretty good. So let's see here. What, in your opinion, would be the best comic to movie adaptation? We're going to get right into it here. And when I say best comic to movie adaptation, I'm not talking about necessarily the most faithful one, but the one that you think is just the best movie, which is based off of a comic book or graphic novel.
Well, when someone asks me this question, I normally give them two responses because I feel like it's an apples and oranges thing. And I always say the Avengers on one hand and the Dark Knight on the other hand. And I think that they're just so different in source. Batman is obviously a very realistic, if you want to say a comic book hero can be realistic. Right. And people say, well, that's a detective movie. The detective just happens to be Batman. Whereas the Avengers is really just a full embrace of comic book awesomeness with a whole team together and just a really fun ride. So they're really different, and I really can't say one is better than the other, but I always say those two are the best.
And I think that would be a pretty fair assessment and something a lot of people would say. Actually, I wrote down a couple of my favorites here as well. I would actually say that my favorite comic to movie adaptation would actually be Batman Begins. Simply because my personal preference is that over Dark Knight, but other than that, Dark Knight would be a close second, followed by Avengers. So I think, in my opinion anyways, and I don't know as much about comic books and how they translate to movies as you do, I did get a chance to read Batman Year One, though.
Which is an excellent book.
It was amazing, extremely well written, and the illustrations are just something else.
Yes, they're amazing.
What would you say would be the most faithful comic to movie adaptation? In this case, we're talking specifically about how accurately, both visually and story and character-wise, translated from comic to movie.
Well, this would be a tougher question because it's much easier to list all the movies that have gone completely way off into left field and just been completely ridiculous about the origins, such as the Sandman being Uncle Ben's killer in Spider-Man 3. If we're looking at most accurate, at least in the modern renditions, I would say that probably Captain America, the First Avenger, would be right up there. The Batman trilogy by Christopher Nolan gets close in a lot of areas, but it also doesn't quite match up in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises. And I always kind of like to poke fun that Tony Stark does more detecting in Iron Man 3 than Batman does in the whole trilogy. So I'd like to see a little more of that from Batman, which is part of him. But Captain America, the First Avenger, really sticks to his origin story and the Red Skull's origin story pretty well. I think they get caught up in the flashback, or not the flashback, the montage really quickly, so you don't get to see a lot, but it does stick very close to the comic book origin.
Right. They at least didn't throw in a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I would actually, before I talk about what I think, in my opinion, the most faithful one that I've seen is, I want to get a little bit of info on you, because you were talking about Batman doing detecting. Do you have any hope whatsoever that he's going to do more detecting in Batman versus Superman? Or do you have you given up on that entirely?
I have not, because it's a new crew, and I'm cautiously optimistic about this new crew and new adaptation of Batman. I always like it when an actor is really super excited about the character he's playing, and Ben Affleck is a huge Batman fan, just like Edward Norton is a huge Incredible Hulk fan. Yeah. And Zack Snyder got a lot of things right in Man of Steel, and I hope that he can get a lot of things right in Batman versus Superman. I think we're going to see kind of an older Batman that's going to give them maybe room to do some prequels to it. And I think he's going to have to do detecting to be able to beat Superman if that's indeed what happens, because otherwise he's not going to really have a shot at that.
Well, I think he'd have to do some level of detecting to even have the mildest of shots against Superman.
Exactly.
I mean, even with Kryptonite, if he were to bring Superman down to Earthling level, Superman is still going to, kick his rear end, because he's Superman versus, if you look at just the bulk on his frame versus Ben Affleck,
Yeah, although I did hear that Ben Affleck is having trouble fitting into his costumes or outfits for his other movies because he is getting really big and muscular for the new Batman movie.
Well, I'm excited to hear that. What do you think of Jesse Eisenberg as Well, first, actually, yeah. What do you think of Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor?
I really think that he could pull it off. I think there's very few actors who can effectively pull off someone as precise as Lex Luthor, and he's a very condescending person, and we've seen that from Eisenberg a lot. Obviously,
right.
he's also a genius.
He went from the awkward person to the condescending person with the Social Network.
Yes, and also in Now You See Me is also very condescending.
Very true. I really enjoyed Now You See Me. I thought it had a lot of flaws, but I enjoyed it as a film overall still.
I did too, yeah. There's a lot of holes in it, but I really enjoyed the acting and the performances. Eisenberg, I think, of course, the interesting part about this is, you have an old Batman and a young Lex Luthor, and they are traditionally rivals in the business sector. So, but I think Eisenberg can pull it off. I think it's a brave choice, and I think it's going to be a good one.
I think he can pull off the intelligence and the condescending part. I'm curious to see. I'll be honest here. I'm not totally sure I can believe he can pull off the intimidating part of the role. I'll go along with that. Even just from a vocal intonation standpoint, and from a stature standpoint as well. I don't think he has much of a presence about him, if you know what I mean.
Yep, I do. Yeah, and I'll agree with that. I think that would be the one hang up that a lot of people have, and that I'm cautious to see about what he does. But
again,
I'm excited to see what he can pull.
As far as acting prowess goes, as far as how much he fits, again, the intelligence, and especially the condescending sarcasticness of the role and things like that, I think he would be excellent. I just think if he was, 10 years older and 40 pounds heavier, might be a little bit.
Yes, I'll go along with that.
Yeah, so anyways, I was going to let you know what I thought my personal, most faithful comic movie adaptation was. I was going to say Watchmen, actually, by Zack Snyder. I thought was an excellent tribute to the source material and stayed really, really close, especially in visual style.
And I would say that's true if the ending hadn't quite gone off. And again, it's mostly pretty right there with the graphic novel, but the ending is a little bit different. Although in this case, I can see why they made that change, as opposed to some other things that other people have made in their adaptations.
Right. I think it was a change that at least made sense with the film before it, rather than, again, things like making Sandman Uncle Ben's killer.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for Spider-Man 3 if anyone still cares.
And if you haven't seen it, don't bother.
Exactly. Yeah. We're just spoiling it to save people the trouble.
Yes.
Okay. What would you say would be the worst comic to movie adaptation that you've ever seen?
Oh my gosh. We're on the subject already. I'm going to have to say Spider-Man 3 just because it's right there. I mean,
really?
you have, not only do you have Gwen Stacy, who is this wallflower, you have Venom, who's in the movie for like 5 seconds, and all that time he's got his mask pulled back.
What they did to Venom in Spider-Man 3 was a travesty. It was just awful.
And to defend Sam Raimi a little bit, he never wanted Venom in Spider-Man 3. The production company shoehorned him in because they thought he would sell more tickets. And apparently he did, but the movie was awful.
Right. So that was actually... Okay, because I did not know that. I'd heard, of course, him saying that he was not interested in putting Venom in a movie. I thought, though, that was just publicity cover. I didn't know. Was he actually against the idea of putting Venom in the movie and it was the studio?
From everything that I can tell, that was the case. I mean, he already had Sandman. He had, Harry Osborn in this absolutely ridiculous, skater boy get up. And Dane DeHaan looks great as the Green Goblin in Amazing Spider-Man 2, by the way. But
I'm not a huge Dane DeHaan fan, so I'm just gonna. I haven't seen him in a lot of stuff. I think he's a bit of an overactor personally, but I'm waiting to see what they do with him because again, I liked the first Amazing Spider-Man, so I'm just sitting here being hopeful.
I am too. Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic again. I like throwing that word around.
Yeah, I have learned from being too optimistic about films in the past. Cough the counselor. I must be cautiously optimistic.
Yes.
So you'd say that Spider-Man 3 is your least favorite comic movie adaptation.
And for the second one, I'm going to have to go with The Dark Knight Rises, just because I really felt that not only did it really take away from who Bane was by making him eventually a lackey at the end of the movie, is there's just so much that doesn't make sense about the movie, from why in the world is Batman drawing a gasoline bat on a building when this nuclear bomb is going to explode, and it's just really the whole process. If you read Nightfall, which is Bane's huge, big kind of splash in the comic book scene. It's this incredibly intricate scheme where Bane, breaks everyone out of Arkham. Batman has to go all the way around Gotham, capturing everybody. He's exhausted. Bane finds out who he is. He shows up at his house in the Batcave and breaks him. And then all of a sudden that changes from this huge, intricate scheme to, oh, you've been retired for 10 years. You're obviously not in shape. I'm just going to pick you up and break you over my knee. It just totally pulls.
Right, and that was, I actually really enjoyed Dark Knight Rises, but that was one of the main things I had a problem with was that, Bane easily defeats Batman in the first fight. And with good reason, the fact that he's been, laid up for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then... And seriously injures Batman's spine in some manner or another. And then over the course of, maybe 6 months of sitting malnourished in a prison, somehow Batman gets enough strength to come back and beat Bane.
Yeah. I don't buy it.
I found that really... I was like, that seems like the wrong order for things to... That life doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have not seen a lot of bad comic book to movie adaptations specifically because I deliberately avoid them. Mm-hmm. But I'd say actually to date probably my least favorite, and this doesn't really count because it's not technically based off of a existing graphic novel, but it would be 300 Rise of an Empire, because it's Xerxes the graphic novel has not yet come out, and that's what the movie's
right,
getting most of its inspiration from. But I was very sorely disappointed in the film. I thought it was had all of the, or it had about half of the style of the first one with none of the substance, and that it was just an incredibly lacking sequel and really disappointing. Because I was actually a fan of the first one, and again, I thought that really portrayed a very accurate, at least visually, homage to the Frank Miller source material.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever see 300 Rise of an Empire or no?
I haven't seen that one. I saw the old one. Honestly, I wasn't a big fan of the original 300, but now I will for sure not see the second one.
Yes, no, there's no reason if you don't like the first one to ever see the second one. What would be the comic that you would most want to see made into a film?
Oh boy, there's so many of them. I'm gonna have to give
give a few if you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give. I'll for sure give one from DC and one from Marvel. And the DC one that I would love to see made into a film. You know what? I have to give two because they're both just so good. Number one, if you're looking at Batman, is the Hush storyline, which is absolutely spectacular.
Who's the villain in that?
The villain, they're all there. The Joker, there's the Riddler, Clayface. The Red Hood makes an appearance, and I can't really say anything more because it's a really tightly wound story, and I don't want to give anything up, but really, really good Batman story. The other one would be the Blackest Night run, which, again, is almost all the superheroes combined, and basically in that one, we see, we know about Green Lantern, we know about, Sinestro with the yellow ring, the Black Lanterns arise, and they're basically zombies, that are taken over by this entity of death, and there's this huge battle that spans basically the entire universe. Who's going to win this battle of death versus life, basically. And
so if you were to have a mashup between that and Walking Dead, you'd have the worst thing that ever existed, is what you're saying.
You never know.
So, okay. And then what was your Marvel pick?
The Marvel one, and again, the interesting thing here is that Marvel Studios is doing such a good job bringing these storylines in. We have Age of Ultron coming up, and we've got, Loki and the whole alien invasion and Thanos.
And Guardians of the Galaxy coming up, which looks amazing.
Yes, which looks fantastic, and you have the whole, Infinity Gauntlet thing. So Marvel Studios is doing a great job. So actually, a lot of the stories that I'd like to see adapted are X-Men and Spider-Man, because the people that have those properties don't do a good job adapting those stories. So what I would really like to see on the Marvel side, I would rather see more X-Men and Spider-Man storylines that haven't been done yet, because it seems like whenever they do the good ones, they do mess them up because Marvel does not have those movie rights. So for example, I'd like to see a really good Venom movie. Mm-hmm. Perhaps even a Maximum Carnage movie. And if you know the comics, Carnage is kind of the offspring of Venom, and Spider-Man and Venom have to team up and basically take the guy down.
Carnage's offspring again?
There's Toxin would be the next one, who I also really like, but hasn't gotten a lot of comic book love either. I'm also would be cautiously optimistic. Again, as long as Bryan Singer has the X-Men, I have absolutely no hope for anything that they do. But word on the street is that X-Men Apocalypse will be the next movie after Days of Future Past. I would love to see Apocalypse on the big screen. I'm just sad that Bryan Singer is doing it because, he'll probably pull out his, bowl of X-Men, would, reach into the bowl and randomly pick characters to do stuff like
Quicksilver out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And, who's this? We'll just have Havoc be in the original X-Men instead of his brother,
Yeah. And now what were your thoughts on The Wolverine? Because that was not Bryan Singer.
Yeah, and I thought it was okay. I was kind of disappointed that they never really made the Silver Samurai, actually somebody not in a metal suit because, come on, how many times
the whole Silver Samurai subplot was really shoehorned in there in the first place, I felt.
It was. And it's too bad because that's a really huge part of the story that it's based on, but they just didn't seem to like that part, and I thought it was okay. I actually ended up giving it 5 out of 10 stars because I just thought it was just a really average movie. Hugh Jackman did a good job. There were some fun parts, but there wasn't really anything too exciting in it.
And what I actually enjoyed it when I saw it because I had just seen I don't know why I put myself through this, but I had just seen X-Men Origins Wolverine in preparation for watching it. And so, anything with Wolverine, and it looks phenomenal after you watch that.
Yeah.
But I really do like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
He does do a good job.
And it is a pity that he's under, Bryan Singer's direction at this point.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said I have heard. Now this may or may not be true, but one of the things that I've heard about Bryan Singer is that when his actors bring comic books on to the set with them to give him ideas for different scenes, that he tells them to put the comic books away. And I'm not 100% sure if that's accurate, but it would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, and I know, I know Christopher Lee did that with Lord of the Rings, because he reads all 3 Lord of the Rings books every year, I believe it is.
Wow.
And he would frequently go up to Peter Jackson and talk to him about how to make things more accurate to the source material. Which is probably one of the reasons why the movies turned out so well.
Yes, and actually Peter Jackson is probably number 2 on my list of directors that change source material things for no apparent reason. But we won't need to get into that.
Yes, that's for another time.
Yes.
Okay, what would be a comic that you would never in a million years want to see made into a film?
Ooh, I like so many of them. I would not like to see another Howard the Duck movie. Okay. We've been there, and it turned out awful. That was basically the first Marvel movie out there way back in the 80s, and really awful. On the DC side of things, DC has this thing where in the comics, every time they feel like their story gets muddled up, they basically say something's wrong with the time stream, and they jump into it, and they have to fix it out.
Right.
So really nothing to do with the time stream unless you're going to do like a solo story. But there's so many. Batman goes back in time. Booster Gold goes back in time. If it's not Booster Gold and going back in time, then leave it alone. We don't need to worry about all this alternate universe stuff. I'm interested to see if Singer can pull anything close to that off, but nothing like that.
Yeah. I'm actually I do have one comic. It's a comic strip, not a comic book, though. So it's a little bordering on the edge of what is qualified here that I would never want to see made into a movie because I think no matter what they did, it would turn out terribly. And that's Calvin and Hobbes.
And I completely 100% agree with that. And I would love to see a Calvin and Hobbes movie, but I would never want them to make one because I just don't think that they could ever do justice to it. So yeah, I totally agree there.
Here's the thing. I love Calvin and Hobbes beyond all belief, and that's why I don't want to ever have anyone ever make a movie because I know that it would end up just ruining my childhood.
Yeah. I mean, look at the classics Marmaduke and Garfield. I mean, you don't need any more than that.
Exactly. Though I thought for a little while, I thought the Garfield and Friends show had something good going for it there.
Yeah.
At least in tone, I felt it kept a lot of the sort of nihilistic, sarcastic tone of the original going pretty well. And then it got made into a movie with Bill Murray, and that was just a horrible idea.
Right, and Garfield, I think, is a lot easier to capture.
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
Intricacies of Calvin and Hobbes.
Definitely, and Calvin and Hobbes is so much human internal monologue. You know, that Calvin's having with himself and things like that, that I think there's just no way that you could ever try to translate that to screen. And there's no actor young enough to play Calvin who could pull off the maturity level that Calvin has.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if there's any tigers out there that are even acting right now. So
pretty sure we don't have any, actually, especially none that can transform into a stuffed animal at a moment's notice. Yeah. So I think, well, I guess that wraps it up. They're never going to make a Calvin and Hobbes film.
There you go.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Jesse. Again, people, his blog is Haunted by Humans at WordPress. If you guys want to check that out, give it a look, and we will see you next week.